Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is 4th of July, the 250th birthday of America. And on 1776, 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence was published. 200 copies were printed and circulated. They're called the Dunlap broadside. That was printed by the printer in Philadelphia, John Dunlap. Now, the although the declaration was published on the 4th of July, it wasn't read publicly until the 8th of July. So it was read 8th of July 1776 in Independence Square in Philadelphia by Colonel John Nixon. I know Nixon, is a Nixon is a name that rings bells because he was our only president to resign, but there was no relationship between them. However, Richard Nixon does have um, an ancestor that was a patriot. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary War, in the war against Great Britain. His name was George Nixon Sr., and he had been a soldier and a spy. Talk about spying. If you remember, Watergate was all about spying. So I guess there was something in the genes, right, for Richard Nixon. Another direct ancestor of his, George Nixon, actually died in the Battle of Gettysburg. So something I want to do is read the Declaration of Independence, which is one of the best pieces of prose in the annals of American presidential, history and political treatises. And I will also later on read the Gettysburg Address because it makes reference to the founding. The Gettysburg was written by Abraham Lincoln. I think that's the best piece of prose in American history. But I'm not going to do that now. Right now, what I want to do is I'm going to discuss some of the signers because that's very important. These signers were very important figures. Um, so I'm going to just take time, and there were 56 signers. I want to I'm not going to discuss all 56 of them. Some of them are, you know, they're remarkable in our history. They did important things, and so I'm just going to touch on a few of the signers, 56 signers. Importantly, let me just give the brief history. So the Committee of Five was made up of, I've done a video discussing the Committee of Five, and some of them were actually amongst the signers in of the Declaration of Independence. So they had um, the responsibility, the mandate from the Second Continental Congress. They set up between June 11th and July the 5th, 1776, to draft the Declaration of Independence, which Thomas Jefferson was its main author, right? So there was a committee of five, and June 28th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson finished his first draft. And of course, July the 4th, 1776, it was published, right? 200 copies were published, the Dunlap broadsides. And on July the 8th, 1776, it was read in the public square in Philadelphia, called Independence Square now, by Colonel John Nixon. So right now, let me just quickly go through some of the signers and discuss some of them. So it was signed by John Hancock. John Hancock, significantly, he was the president of the Second Continental Congress. He was from Massachusetts. At some point, he became governor of Massachusetts. He was one of the richest men in America, right? John Hancock. So he was the first to sign it. And for New Hampshire, there's a guy called Josiah Bartlett. Josiah Bartlett would become the first governor of New Hampshire. He was a physician, right? He was a physician and a soldier and a colleague of, uh, close associate of George Washington, General George Washington, who would go on to become president. Then from Massachusetts, it was called Massachusetts Bay. So Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, of course, was a cousin of John Adams, our second president. He was the leader of the Sons of Liberty, the rabble rousers who organized the Boston Tea Party, which started all the problems, right? All the trouble. I've done videos discussing this. And then there was, of course, his cousin, John Adams, who did become the second president. And by the way, the Declaration, John Adams was very pivotal in all of this. He was the one who was pushing for independence. In fact, I'm watching the 1972 film, the musical called 1776, and you can see the prominent role John Adams played. When I'm done with the musical, it's very interesting. I thought that would be my Independence Day treat. I'm going to discuss it. Very, very interesting. Very well done. So John Adams, and of course, there's there's just four signers from Massachusetts. There's Robert Treat Paine, but Elbridge Gerry, very important because he became our vice president, right? He became our vice president to James Madison. He died in office. Of course, both of James Madison's vice presidents died in office. The other was George Clinton. But Elbridge Gerry was from Massachusetts, and his name is very important because the term gerrymandering, which is very prominent in today's political lexicon, right? Gerrymandering actually is a derivative of his name, Gerry, right? Elbridge Gerry. So gerrymandering is from his name. And let me move on to Connecticut. I'm not going to go over all of them, just some that are featured prominently in our history that I can discuss. There's Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman was a member of the Committee of Five. He was a lawyer. And there's Oliver Wolcott. Oliver Wolcott became governor of Connecticut. His son, Oliver Wolcott Jr., became a protege of Alexander Hamilton, and he succeeded Alexander Hamilton as the second Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. Oliver Wolcott, very effective, one of the most effective Treasury secretaries we've ever had. So Oliver Wolcott, he also became governor of Connecticut, just like his son. Now, from New York, there is Phil Livingston. Phil Livingston was the first cousin of Robert R. Livingston, who was a member of the Committee of Five, those people who drafted the Declaration, but he was called away. That's Robert R. Livingston. He was called away, and so his cousin represented him. That's Phil Livingston. So they're cousins. The Livingston family, I did a video talking about the prominence of the Livingston family. Many people, they were like the aristocratic family of New York, of the Hudson River. They had the Lord, Baron Livingston, Lord Livingston, who had got over 160,000 acres of land in the Hudson Valley from King George, right, of Great Britain. So very prominent family. Many families, married into them, descended from them. The Bushes, right, George Bush, the two presidents, and of course there's the Roosevelts as well. So many prominent families are associated with Livingston, and of course Tom Keene, current Congressman Tom Keene from New Jersey, who was missing for about 4 months, and he revealed that he was hospitalized for treatment of his depression. So he is a descendant of a relative of Phil Livingston. Then New Jersey. No, let me skip to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is very important. Robert Morris. So Robert Morris was dubbed the financier, right? The financier of the Revolution. In 1775, he was the richest man in America, but his wealth was in shipping, right? In importing and exporting, the shipping trade between the British Caribbean and Britain. But of course, the purpose of the First Continental Congress was to boycott trade with Great Britain, and so his wealth declined. But he personally used his personal fortune to actually finance the war, and also he became the first. He was U.S. superintendent uh, of finance, right? So that was sort of the predecessor office to Treasury Secretary. In fact, he was the first choice of George Washington to be our first Treasury Secretary. He declined it. He declined it and recommended Alexander Hamilton instead. Uh, unfortunately for unfortunately for Robert Morris, though, Robert Morris um, would become bankrupt because he speculated in land after the war, and there was a panic in the 1790s, and so he became bankrupt, and he spent time in debtor's prison for about 2 years. He died penniless, right, and obscure. Unfortunately, the financier uh, of the revolution. So that's Morris from Pennsylvania. There's Benjamin Franklin. We all know Dr. Benjamin Franklin, very popular. He became a main diplomat to France, and through him he got a lot of loans from France. And of course, he's the Renaissance man. He was originally from Massachusetts, but he ran away as a boy and moved to Pennsylvania. He became president of Pennsylvania. That's what they called their governor. I think they called him then president at the time. But so very significant person in our history. Benjamin Franklin. He was called the Dr. Benjamin Franklin, right? So very, he's known for his innovative experiments with lightning and electricity, and of course he got a doctorate from Oxford. That's why they call him Dr. Benjamin Harrison. It was an honorary doctorate in civil law, interestingly, not in science. So, and then there's Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was a physician, right? He's typically called the founder of American psychiatry. He was a friend, close friend of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and notably he reconciled both of them, and then began their famous correspondence after their retirement. So Benjamin Rush, there's something that's interesting about him. He propounded a theory. He said black people were actually white people under their black skin. He propounded. He said he claimed, he theorized that, of course, wrongly, that the black skin, right, was an outer layer hiding the white skin of black people, that they were actually really white people, but it was a form of heritable leprosy, right? And so he thought they should look for a cure. And so he also said that, since black people were really white people, but they had, the skin disease that made them appear black, that they were equal to white people intellectually and morally, that they were equal to white people intellectually. So he was one of those people who thought they were blacks and whites were equal. But of course, his theories inadvertently led to the pathologizing of blackness, right? So it had its unintended consequence. Of course, he was wrong, about skin complexion of black people. So that's Benjamin Rush. Who else? Then that's from Pennsylvania. So there are several signers from Pennsylvania, by the way. I'm not going through all of them just for the sake of time. Okay, Maryland. Maryland, there's Samuel Chase. Samuel Chase would later on become an associate justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He was appointed by George Washington, and he has the distinction of being the only person to have ever been impeached, the only justice of the U.S. Supreme Court to have been impeached by the House of Representatives. However, he was tried and acquitted by the Senate. So that's Samuel Chase. Um, a relative of his, Samuel P. Chase, will become a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as well, U.S. Supreme Court. So that's from Maryland. And then there's Charles Carroll of Carrollton. So Charles Carroll of Carrollton, at the signing of the independence, was the richest man in America. He was the richest man in America, and they said the framers uh, said he had the most to lose. By the way, these 56 signers, by signing this declaration, of course, realized that they were literally signing their death warrants, right? But so they said Charles Carroll, because of his fortune, he was worth over £2 million at the time. In today's money it's about $616 million. So he was the richest man at the time, and they said he was basically that he had the most to lose. Um, and of course, he was from Maryland. That's Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Then let's move further. Virginia. So Virginia at the time of the declaration was the most important, most significant. It was the richest colony, right? It was the largest, the richest colony, and so of course there were prominent people. Interestingly, George Washington, of course, didn't sign the declaration. Uh, George Wythe. So George Wythe is a signer from Virginia. George Wythe was he was a lawyer, and he was the one who trained Thomas Jefferson. So back then there wasn't anything like a law school. So after college, I mean, you didn't even have to go to college, but you would go and apprentice, as a law clerk in the office of a lawyer, right? And for several years, and then after that, like an apprentice. After that period of apprenticeship, then the future law, the candidate takes an exam, the bar exam, to qualify as a lawyer. So George Wythe was the teacher of, he was the mentor, and of course of Thomas Jefferson, and he taught him law. Interestingly, George Wythe had a he had a student who was a mixed race freedman, right? He was mixed race. Michael Brown. He lived in his home, and after his wife died, his former enslaved person, Lydia Broadnax, I think that's if I can recall his name. She would be. He started to pay her as a housekeeper, and so they lived together in Richmond. And he taught Michael Brown. He was teaching him Latin, Greek, mathematics, and he put him in his will. And he entrusted his continued education to Thomas Jefferson. That Thomas Jefferson was to continue to educate Michael Brown after his death, and he left him a substantial portion of his estate. So of course there were rumors at the time that uh, Lydia Broadnax, George Wythe's former enslaved person, was actually his mistress, and Michael Brown, the mixed race freedman, was their son. But historians claim from biological evidence that there's no evidence of this. It debunks this, dismisses this rumor, right? So of course they could do DNA testing. I don't know how. I guess they were able to test their remains or something. So, but that was the rumors circulating then. Unfortunately, however, all of them were poisoned with arsenic by the grandnephew of George Wythe. So unfortunately, so Thomas Jefferson was not able to take him in and continue to tutor him. So that's the sad tale of George Wythe. Now, Richard Henry Lee. Richard Henry Lee uh, comes from a prominent Virginia family, the Lee family. He would become a diplomat, him and his brothers, to France. So Richard Henry Lee, his brother was Francis Lightfoot Lee. Both of them signed. I think they're the only two brothers who signed the Declaration. So from Virginia, so two brothers from Virginia, Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee. Interestingly, they're related to the general of the Confederate Army during the Civil War, right? During the Civil War, I'm sweating, so sorry. During the Civil War between 1861 and 1865, General Robert Lee, was their descendant. So that's the Lee family. And then, of course, there's Thomas Jefferson, who became our third president. And, of course, he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. And there's also Benjamin Harrison. So Benjamin Harrison, the signer, was the father of our ninth President William Henry Harrison, and also an ancestor of the great-grandfather of Benjamin Harrison. I think that was our 23rd president. Yes, our 23rd president. He's the one sandwiched between Grover Cleveland, who was our 22nd and 24th president. And so let me see. Okay, I will stop here. I think that's about all the signers that I want to discuss. So 56 signers anyway. I'm going to do another video and just do a reading of the Declaration of Independence. I think it's important, considering they say almost half of Americans struggle with reading these days. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.